Creative people exhibit. I'm sorry, there is a glitch here. Okay. Creative people exhibit the full range of personality traits. Certain personality characteristics are exhibited more by creative people. At the core of the set of personality, characteristics are related to traits of independence, autonomy, self-confidence, and non-conformity. Creative people tend to think for themselves, and they are less easily influenced by the opinion of others than the average person is. They have a tendency to be motivated more by intrinsic factors. What is this intrinsic factors? Intrinsic factors are something that comes from within yourself, right? Okay, so such as the desire for self-expression, than by the extrinsic rewards, such as public recognition of work. Creative people also tend to be more tolerant of complexity, contradiction, and ambiguity than others. They do not feel compelled to simplify everything, and they are not as troubled by the uncertainty as many people are. Sternberg also suggests that the creative people are willing to grow, willing to change, willing to take risks, and willing to work at overcoming obstacles. Creative thinkers are curious, actively seeking problems, challenging problems, see problems as interesting, and they are comfortable with imagination, challenge assumption, and doesn't give up easily. They are optimistic and hardworking, and they are also inclined to express rather than inhibit feelings. Critical thinking. So from understanding the characteristics of creative thinking, we move towards critical thinking. What is critical thinking? Just turn to your books, right? And you move to, for me, it is a Xerox page. It is page number 84, right? And I want you to look at 7.42, right? That is the page. 7.42, critical thinking. What is critical thinking about? Critical thinking is a process of thinking reflectively and productively and evaluating the evidence. The process of using reasoning to discern what is true, what is false, the ability to critically evaluate information is essential to all areas of daily life. Thinking clearly, critically means asking yourself how you know something. People who think creatively grasp the deeper meaning of ideas, keep an open mind about different approaches and perspectives, and decide for themselves what to believe or to do. Critical thinking is currently of considerable interest to both psychologists and educators. Today, educators at all levels embrace the idea that an important outcome of education is to develop students' ability to think creatively. Critical thinking is also the ability to think clearly, rationally about what to do, what to believe. It includes also the ability to engage in reflective and independent thinking. It is a type of thinking that helps a person in stepping aside from his own personal beliefs, prejudices, opinions, and to sort out the faiths and discover the truths even at the expense of his basic belief system. The critical thinking is a higher order, well-disciplined thought processes, which involves the use of cognitive skills like conceptualization, interpretation, analysis, synthesis, evaluation for arriving at an unbiased, valid, and reliable judgment of gathered or communicated information or data as a guide to one's own belief and action. Someone with critical thinking skill is able to do the following. You can see a small diagrammatic representation here. Just after the second paragraph, you will see critical thinking, and you see different things are mentioned there, like analyze, infer, evaluate, interpret, generate, and reason. Okay, so all these things come part of the critical thinking. Now here in your books, they are given someone who thinks critical skills are able to do the following. What are they able to do? Understand the logical connection between ideas, identify, construct, and evaluate arguments, and detect inconsistencies and common mistakes in reasoning, solve problems systematically, identify the relevance and importance of ideas, reflect on the justification of one's own beliefs and values. Critical thinking means being open to the possibility of other ways of looking at things. Too often, we take one side of an issue without really evaluating the issue or examining it from different perspectives. People often know that there is another side to an issue or an evidence contrary to what they believe. Simple openness to other viewpoints can help us to keep people from jumping into conclusions. As Socrates once said, such caution in thinking, that is, knowing what it is you don't know, is sometimes the first step to true wisdom. Few students are taught to think critically and to develop a deeper understanding of concepts. Schools spend so much time in getting education, in getting students to give single correct answer in a in imitative way rather than encouraging students to come up with new ideas. Too often we have a tendency to recite, define, describe, state, and list rather than analyze, infer, connect, synthesize, criticize, create, evaluate, think, and rethink. Too often we are inclined to stay on the surface of the problem rather than to stretch our minds. So you see how critical thinkers are. Again, your book has a beautiful diagrammatic representation. You have almost some 6 circles in the center of critical thinkers are, right? Which gives you a basic understanding of what kind of qualities the critical thinkers possess. Now, critical thinkers are self-aware, self-reflective, active listeners, and empathetic. Not only that, they're able to consider information from multiple sources, even from those that are difficult. They are aware that stress and the opinion of others can distort thinking. They are also open to new information, seeks and considers alternative hypotheses. They are able to conduct analysis, draw accurate conclusion, and articulate thoughts. Other than that, critical thinkers are able to recognize faulty thinking, pseudoscience, right? Which is just based on the faulty premises, fraud and the caucus, and other elements of manufactured reality that reflect dominant discourse and not the necessary truth. Right. Then we have also another diagram representation of competitive climate. What are the factors that impede critical thinking? Okay. So let's look at the diagrammatic representation, after which you can also see a representation of 2 different kinds of thinking. What is creative thinking and what is critical thinking? Yeah. So following are some of the strategies that stimulate you to think reflectively and productively. Now, what are those? What are those? To be open-minded, to explore option and avoid narrow thinking, to be intellectually curious, wonder, probe, question, inquire, and also be alert for problems of inconsistencies. Be intellectually careful, check for inaccuracies and errors, be precise and be organized. Look for multiple determinants of behavior. People have a tendency to explain things as having a single cause. However, mind and behavior have multiple determinants. Think like a scientist. Scientific thinkers examine the available evidence about some aspect, evaluate how strongly the data supports their hunches, analyze disconfirming evidence, and carefully consider whether they have explored all the possible factors and explanations. It is also critical to look for biases in the way people think and behave. So you go through this, which is a diagrammatic representation. They are given very clearly what is the different kinds of thinking, what is this critical thinking, what goes into critical thinking, like analysis, right? Convergent, like vertical, probability, judgment, focus, objective, answer, left brain thinking, verbal, linear reasoning, etc. Right. In creative thinking, you find generative, divergent, lateral, possibility, dependent judgment, diffuse, subjective, and answer, right brain, visual, associative, and also novelty. Right. So you can see very clearly they are given you the distinction between what is critical thinking and what is creative thinking. You can check your progress. And now we move on to a very important aspect of cognitive development theory, right? The moment we think about cognitive development theory, who comes to our minds? Jean Piaget. He is a famous psychologist. Now, cognitive theory, what is it? It is a theory that is concerned about development of a person's thought processes. It also looks at how these thought processes influence how we understand, interact with the world. The former cognitive thinker was Jean Piaget, who proposed an idea that seems obvious now, but helps revolutionize how we think about child development. Children think differently than adults. Piaget then proposed a theory of cognitive development to account for the steps and sequence of children's intellectual development. Let us look at some of the central concepts, especially of Jean Piaget theory, right? Which is a common one. The first one of the central concept is talks about is the schema. What is a schema? A schema describes both the mental and the physical action involved in understanding and knowing. Schemas are categories of knowledge that helps us to interpret and understand the world. In Piaget's view, a schema includes both a category of knowledge and the process of obtaining knowledge. We experience this new information is used to modify, add, change previously existing schema, right? For example, a child may have a schema about a type of animal, such as a dog. If a child's sole experience has been with small dogs, a child might believe that all dogs are small, furry, and have four legs. Suppose then that the child encounters a large dog, the child will take this in a new information, modifying the previously existing schema to include the new information. So that is how it is. So even for us, we may have some simple understanding and that will be a schema. When we gain better knowledge of the particular thing, our schema expands. It gets, added to the previous thought processes of ours, the previous schema that we have held. The process of changing or altering our existing schemas in the light of new information is known as accommodation. Accommodation involves altering existing schemas or ideas as a result of new information or new experiences. New schemas may also be developed during this process. I don't think I need to explain this. Very simple, right? So let me move on to the next. Next one is assimilation. What is assimilation? It is the process of taking in new information into a previously existing schema. That is what is known as assimilation. The old assimilated into the new. The process is somewhat subjective because we tend to modify experience or information somewhat to fit in without pre-existing belief. In the example above, a dog and labeling it as a dog, seeing a dog and labeling it as a dog is an example of assimilating the animal into the child's dog schema. Piaget believed that all children try to strike a balance between assimilation and accommodation, which is achieved through a mechanism called equilibrium. As children progress through stages, the cognitive development is most important to maintain balance between applying previous knowledge, that is assimilation, and changing behavior to account to new knowledge, that is accommodation. Equilibrium helps explain how children are able to move from one stage of thought into the next. Okay, so now here we have a stages of cognitive development in a diagrammatic format, which is very simple to understand. You look at this diagrammatic representation, which is on 7.5.2. On the heading, you'll find stages of cognitive development. And you see how it moves from one stage to another, which begins with 0 to, that is birth to 2 years, moving on from 2 years to 7 years, and then from 7 to 12, and then from 12 onwards. And what are the things that takes place? Before, from birth to 2 years, exploration of through sense organs, right? And object permanence. And then moving on to language development, biological thinking, egocentric conservation. And then from 7 to 12, linear thinking. And then from 12 onwards, logical with multiple possibilities and abstract thinking. And now when you look at now below the paragraph, each one of it is very clearly explained to you. So please go through it when you have, when you find some time, and make sure that you read up, because it is given in a very simple language. You see how birth to 2 years comes into the stage called sensory motor stage, which involves all the sense organs, right? Similarly, the second stage is the pre-operational stage. That is from 2 to 7 years, where language development happens, right? Where they keep modeling, right? Where the thinking changes. And then you move on to the third, that is 7 to 12 years, where linear thinking happens, right? So you read up in detail, you will have a better understanding, right? The concrete operational stage, where logic reversibility happens, and the former operation said logic, abstract thought, and finally the children are able to solve their own problem. That is a problem solving. Evaluation of Piaget's theory. Piaget's work has been very influential, and he has left behind a great legacy. His focus on qualitative development generated interest in child development and has an enormous impact on the future of education and developmental psychology. While Piaget did not specifically apply his theory to education, many educational programs are built upon the belief that children should be taught at the level for which they are developmentally prepared. In addition to this, a number of instructional strategies have been derived from Piaget's work. These strategies include providing a supportive environment, utilizing social interactions, and peer teaching, and helping children are fallacies and inconsistencies in their thinking. Much of the criticism of Piaget's work is in regards to his research methods. A major source of inspiration for this theory was Piaget's observation of his own 3 children. In addition to this, the other children in Piaget's small research sample were all from very well developed. Yeah. So research has disputed Piaget's argument that all children will automatically move in the next stage of development as they mature. Some data suggests that environmental factors may play a role in the development of formal operation. Most researchers agree that children possess many of the abilities at an early age than Piaget suspected. Recent research on theory of mind has found that the children are between the age of 4 and 5 years have rather sophisticated understanding of their own mental processes as well as those of other people. So with this, we close this chapter, right? So you have your now question and answers. Summary is given. Please go through the summary, right? Check your progress. You have glossary, very beautifully given. All the difficult terminologies, go through the glossary. You will be able to have a better understanding. Okay. So from unit 7, we move on to now unit 8. Now, what does unit 8 talks about? Unit 8 is all about intelligence, right? So what is defining intelligence, theories of intelligence, concept of IQ, distribution of intelligence, intelligent tests, right? So we will deal with all this one by one. Okay, so let's move on to now. The main objective is basically to analyze theoretical contribution of intelligence, right? To describe and utilize the concept of IQ, right? So what is intelligence, right? It's a very general mental capacity that, among other things, involves an ability to reason, plan, solve problems, think abstractly, comprehend complex ideas, learn quickly, and learn from experience. Quite a long definition, yeah? It is not merely a book learning, a narrow academic skill, or taking smarts. Rather, it reflects a broader and deeper capability for comprehending our surroundings. That is catching on, making sense of things, figuring it out. Okay, so intelligence encompasses a number of mental abilities such as reasoning, planning, and problem solving. The topic of intelligence is one of the biggest and the most debated in psychology. Intelligence changes systematically with age. Our mental abilities typically grow until they peak around the age 20. Children know and can do more as they get older. From the birth to the age 16 or 18, we go from rather being limited beings with small knowledge into a complex one with an enormous knowledge and skills and abilities. With age, some functions decline, some slowly, some quickly, some rapidly, although some abilities usually increase until 60s. The exercise of intelligence seems to prevent the decline in some individuals. Both hereditary and environmental factors, the forces contribute heavily to intellectual development performance. The evidence from two studies, the twin studies of adopted children, indicate that half of the variation among the individuals in IQ is attributed to hereditary factors. But regardless of how one's genetic predispositions, barren intellectual environment clearly inhibit cognitive growth, whereas enriched intellectually stimulating environment can easily promote it, can clearly promote it. Parents who create stimulating home environment by becoming involved in their child's learning activities, carefully explaining new concepts, providing age-appropriate challenges, and consistently encouraging the child to achieve are likely to have children who score relatively high on IQ tests. Two other family characteristics that affect intellectual performances are family size and the birth order. Firstborns and the children from smaller families tend to obtain slightly higher IQ than the later born and children from the large families. Group differences in intelligence can best be explained by environmental hypothesis. Many poor people and minority group members score low IQ tests because they grow up impoverished environments that are much less conducive to intellectual development than those from the middle class. So what is the definition now? Psychologists define intelligence in different ways. If you really think about it, who do you actually consider intelligent? Albert Einstein, perhaps. But so are the painters and the writers and the actors and the actresses, etc. So let us come to the main definition. Intelligence is described as the ability to solve problems, a capacity to adapt and learn from experience. Intelligence, unlike height, weight, or age, cannot directly seen or be measured. We can only indirectly by studying and comparing the intelligent acts that people perform. Welcher 1958 defined intelligence as the aggregate or global capacity of the individuals and purposefully to think rationally and to deal effectively with this environment. Right? So from here, we move on to theories of intelligence. Right? Now, here there are only few theories, the main theories, and then afterwards there will be the intelligence test. Okay. So let us focus on what are the theories in intelligence. The topic of intelligence is one of the biggest and the most debated in psychology. So when you're thinking about theories in intelligence, who comes to your mind? Sir Francis Galton, who wanted to show that intelligence was inherited. Modern intelligence testing began with the work of Alfred Bennett, who devised a scale to measure child's mental age. You must have heard about this Bennett scale, very, very common. Whenever we want to help children to, check the IQ, this scale is used. The development of theories of intelligence and the development of measures or test of intelligence moved hand in hand. Bennett's development of the first test of intelligence parallels Spearman's first systematic theory of intelligence. The earliest psychometric theories of intelligence by Spearman, Truscott, and Guilford were based on factor analysis, a statistical procedure, and were based on measurement issues. They were predominantly ability theories. They served two important purposes. First, they provided logical models of the structure of human intellect. And second, they established that intelligence may be conceptualized as comprising many separate abilities that operate more or less independently. The new theoretical models of intelligence, such as those developed by Robert Sternberg and Howard Gardner, seek to understand intelligence as a process. Spearman's two-factor theory. The earliest empirical studies of general cognitive ability were conducted by Charles Spearman, who termed the general intelligence factor, that is Spearman 1904. This was the first systematic theory of intelligence. Spearman developed his theory of intelligence by applying factor analysis, a statistical procedure to assess which of the many different intellectual skills and abilities demonstrated by the individuals were related to each other. Now, based on the factor analysis, Spearman proposed that intelligence is made up of two components, a factor or general intelligence and a collection of specific intellectual abilities that he labeled as S factor. One is the G factor, the other one is the S factor. According to his view, we all have certain general intelligence, that is a G factor, probably genetically determined, and that underlies all our intelligent behavior. We also have specific abilities, that is the S factor, that more useful on some tasks than the others. A person with high G factor will score higher on most skill tests than a person with average level of general intelligence. Okay, Spearman argued that intelligence was a property common to all cognitive processes, and the thought of intelligence as a mere mental energy, energizing diverse faculties and functions. Spearman, working from the theory-driven perspective, argued that a good test of intelligence must concentrate not on developing a single type of question that measures G, but on incorporating the widest possible diversity of test items, the common element of which would emerge as a general ability. Okay, so I would recommend you that you read a little more about this and you'll be able to answer, and it is given in a very simple language, right? So go through the Spearman's two-factor theory. We move on to the next, that is the Truststone theory of primary mental abilities. Okay. Using factor analysis as a large number of subjects, he found evidence for a general intelligence ability as Spearman has proposed. Instead, Truststone has declared that human intelligence is a composite of 7 primary mental abilities, and he has put it in order here. That is verbal comprehension, reasoning, perceptual speed, numerical ability, word fluency, associative memory, and spatial visualization. Truststone considered each mental ability to be independent. All 7 primary abilities has to be measured to assess an individual intelligence. Okay, so theory is focused on 7 different primary mental abilities. Then we move on to Guilford's theory of intelligence. What is it? It's an ambitious effort to isolate the different kinds of intellectual attributes. Guilford proposes the structure of intellectual model in 1955 based on factor analysis. In Guilford's structure of intellect, all mental abilities are conceptualized with 3-dimensional framework. There are 3 features of intellectual task: the content or the type of information, the product or the form on which the information is represented, and the operation or the type of mental activity performed. Okay, so 5 content dimension, broad areas of information to which human intellect applies, right? So you can see the diagrammatic representation here, and you can also see they have transcription. Srinivas, not you, Srinivas. What is the small live transcription closed? Captioning has been enabled. Anyway, I will continue. Little more is there with this. So visual, auditory, symbolic, somatic, and behavioral. 6 products in increasing complexity: units, classes, relations, systems, transformations, and implications. Then intellectual process given. Let me make a note. Live transcriptions. Okay, so there are 6 operation general intellectual processes: cognition, memory recording, memory retention, divergent prediction, convergent prediction, and evaluation. And that's how Guilford model is an open system such that it allows for newly discovered categories to be added in any of these 3 directions. Guilford's structure of intellect has few supporters today as it is unduly complex. Then the next we move on to the Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence. Harvard University's of Howard Gardner outlined a view of human intelligence that reflects both his dissatisfaction with the idea that intelligence is a single trait and that can be measured with the IQ test, and his belief that factorial approach to describing the structure of human intellect fails to capture the complexity, diversity, and practicality of the human intelligence. Gardner observed that in the word community, there are many different kinds of things people can do well that are assigned different value in different cultures. To reflect on the to reflect on this diversity, people can do well that are assigned to different. To reflect this diversity, Gardner proposed that humans have 8 kinds of intelligence which are independent of each other. The first form of human intellect in Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence is linguistic intelligence. Linguistic intelligence includes the kind of verbal ability or a skill with words that writers or orators display. A second form of intelligence, that is logical mathematical intelligence, is a typical scientist, logician, and mathematicians. A third type of intellect is the spatial intelligence, ability to think accurately about the spatial aspects of the surrounding environment. You see a diagrammatic representation here where you find multiple intelligence and everything is very clearly explained and given beautifully here. Okay, so these first 3 types of, okay, so you go through this whole thing, you will have a better understanding. Okay, we move to the concept of IQ. An intelligent quotient, that is IQ, is a score derived from one of the several different standardized tests designed to assess intelligence. The term IQ, from German intelligence quotient, was devised by the German psychologist William Stern as proposed method of scoring children's intelligence, such as those developed by Alfred Bennett and Theodore Simon in the early 20th century. Lewis Terman accepted the form of scoring, expressing a score in quotient of mental age and chronological age. For his revision of the Bennett-Simon test, the first version of the Stanford Binet intelligence scale introduced the intelligent quotient and became the standard of comparison for subsequent intelligence tests. Although the term IQ is still in common use, the scoring of modern IQ tests, such as the Wilshire Adult Intelligence Scale, is now based on shared scoring of the subject's rank order on the test item content, with the medium set score of 100 and the standard deviation of 15. Although not all tests adhere to the assignment, 15 IQ points to each standard deviation. A person's IQ score was originally calculated by dividing the person's mental age by the chronological age, and then by multiplying by 100. In other words, MA plus CA into 100. Chronological age was simply the child's biological age or how old the child was. Mental age was given first by giving the child an intelligence test and seeing how they scored. This score was then compared with how other children did on the test. It was found that as children get older, their score on the test would improve. Mental age was then defined as the age in which typical child exhibits a particular level of performance on the test. Okay, so now here they are given the examples. Go through the examples for better understanding, and you'll be able to understand what is the concept of IQ. Then we move on to distribution of intelligence. They are again given the diagrammatic representation. You can look at the diagram. All persons are not created equal. Humans differ greatly in many traits. Intelligence is also unequally distributed in general population, and intelligence scores follow approximately normal distribution, meaning that most people score near the middle of the distribution of score, and the score drops off fairly rapidly in frequency as one moves in either direction of the center. Yes? Somebody is saying anything? Yes, anybody has any issues? Am I audible, Ma? Am I audible? Okay, so I am at 8.4. Okay, that is all about the distribution of the curve. Kindly go through it. Then there is intelligent tests. Okay, the different types of intelligent tests are there, and what is intelligence and how it is measured, right? By which you yield the IQ scores. The first proper intelligence test was devised by Alfred Bennett in 1905. This test identified children with below normal intelligence so that they could be given special educational facilities. The test led to the development of numerous later tests. Among the best known of such tests was the Stanford Binet test produced at Stanford University in 1916 by Louis Terman and the Welcher scales. All these tests measure several aspects of intelligence. Many contain vocabulary test problems based on analogy and the test to measure verbal ability. It is possible with most standardized tests to obtain several measures of an individual performance. The best known measure is IQ, that is the intelligence quotient. The IQ is regarded as an overall measure of the intellectual ability. To calculate the IQ of an individual, the test performance is compared against the score obtained by other children of his or her age. The average score of an intelligence test is 100. Intelligence measured served several practical purposes. The score on intelligence tests are used for diagnosis in education, clinical work, selection in education and industry, and for counseling and placement. Intelligence tests may be administered individually or in groups. Right? Types of intelligence tests, we have verbal scales, right, of intelligence, which rely largely on words. They usually consist of vocabulary items, verbal analogies, general knowledge, and so on. The Simon Bennett test, the first intelligence test, is an example of the verbal test of intelligence because the use of language, this type of test cannot be used with illiterate. This type cannot be used with illiterates or people who do not speak English. They also tend to have a cultural bias. The second one is the non-verbal scales. What are these? They are considered pure measures of general intelligence and are excellent indicators of abstract reasoning, particularly in the visual spatial domain. These instruments have negligible ethnic biases. Non-verbal tests may be performance tests which requires the subject to do something. Example, drawing, or maybe to solve base problems, or they may have paper and pencil tests which provide printed non-verbal items and instructions given to the subject. Right. Non-verbal intelligence requires people to determine patterns and relationship between abstract figures. Because of such tests do not involve language, they are presumed to rely less on specific cultural experience. The Raven's progressive matrix, the RPM, is widely used as a non-verbal intelligence test designed to measure the visual, spatial reasoning, and general intelligence. The Goodenough Harris drawing test is a quick and an easy way to test children. Non-verbal tests are generally designed for primary and preschool children and illiterates. While requiring no reading or writing, these tests make extensive use of oral instructions and communication. Right? The third one is the performance scales. The Binet scale has often been criticized for its emphasis on language and verbal skills. To deal with this problem, Welcher included an entire scale that provided a measure of non-verbal intelligence performance scale. The performance scale consists of tasks that require a subject to do something. For example, copy symbols or point out a missing detail rather than merely answering the question. Performance tests involve manipulation of objects with a minimal use of paper and pencil. Now we have individuals and group tests. In that, intelligence tests can be done individually or in the group. The best known individual intelligence tests are the Binet-Simon scale, the Stanford Binet Intelligence Scale, and the Welcher Adult Intelligence Scale. Okay, so the Alfred Binet and his colleague Theodore Simon devised the general test of mental ability in 1905, and it was revised in 1908 and then again in 1911. The test yielded scores in terms of mental age with a chronological age that typically correspond to a particular level of performance. Example, a 10-year-old child whose scores indicates a mental age of 12 performed a typical 12-year-old. The Stanford Binet Intelligence Scale in 1916 by Louis Terman and his colleague at Stanford University created the Stanford Binet Intelligence Scale by expanding and revising the Binet-Simon scale. Okay, then we move on to the Welcher's Adult Intelligence Scale. David Welcher published the first test for assessing intelligence in the adults. The Welcher Adult Intelligence Scale contains many items that assess non-verbal reasoning ability and therefore depends less on verbal ability. Group IQ tests originated in the early 1900s in USA with the mass intelligence test of World War I recruits. Perkins and Otis developed two group IQ tests, the Army Alpha test for recruits who could read and the Army Beta test for illiterates and non-English speaking subjects. The real value lay in the mass of the data generated from approximately 3 million subjects. The tests were enormously helpful both as a model for group intelligence tests and as an impetus to developing more effective tests. Okay. So with that, we complete also the unit 8, right? You have a summary, you have model questions, and then you can also check your progress. With this, we complete the block 3, and tomorrow we'll move on to block 4. Thank you.